All right, 21.2, 21.3. So we're talking about solar energy first. So as we talked about real briefly today, there's passive solar energy and then there's active solar energy or active solar panels and whatnot. So passive is basically the buildings absorb heat in the winter and they keep it cool in the summer, but the modifications need to happen. The thing I wrote there is like modifications to the building need to occur. Not necessarily to the technology, but to the building they need to occur because that passive energy can't store up electricity to use. Whereas the active, it can. It says using solar energy to store energy. So that energy can be used as electricity to power kind of whatever appliances you have in your house. So the picture up here on 585 shows some of those modifications. So you can see plants buffer house from temperature swings. You got the overhang shades, you got thermal stuff, south facing porch, all that. Those are the modifications to basically make it so those passive solar panels are working positively and are working to help your house rather than just basically a waste of money. Then you can see down here, there's the active solar panels. It's basically taking that energy and basically making it so you can warm stuff up. Okay, in this case, you can see it's basically taking fluid and warming the fluid up is what it's doing. Okay, that energy is used, and then basically it goes back out. Or it goes into the water tank, stuff like that. All right, so now moving on to 586. So there's what's called a concentrated solar panel, or excuse me, concentrated solar power. So it has a whole bunch of different ways to do this, but the same basic methodology, or same basic idea. You heat a liquid, you make steam, it turns a turbine. Is the general idea of this. Like this idea, this picture right here, oh, it's a little bit off the screen, sorry. Basically, they are using this dish to concentrate sunlight to cook what is in that pot. And that's actually becoming really, really, really popular in India. This one over here, these pictures, is concentrating that solar panel. So basically, these aren't solar panels. They're basically just a whole bunch of mirrors is what's going on. There's a bunch of fluid up here. It gets that fluid to steam. That drives a turbine. Okay, there's a big one of these outside of Las Vegas, actually. But the biggest issue with all of this is if a bird flies in those rays, they literally catch fire and die. So we're talking about like the wind turbines, those kill birds. These potentially solar panels and solar powered plants per se can also be killing birds because of those rays are really, 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 really hot. All right, so now we're moving to 587. So there's these things called photovoltaic cells. They also just say PV cells. Like you can see how it's abbreviated right there, PV cells. So they are normally what you think of when you think of a solar panel. You stick one on top of your house. They're a thin film of solar cells. They're kind of a newer technology, and that's why they're called these new alternatives or these new renewables, because they've got a whole bunch of potentials. They potentially are making them into roof shingles. So instead of having a big panel on the top of your house, you have individual shingles to do the same thing. They're potentially doing highways with them, putting it on the top of trucks. So, like a big semi truck, the whole top of that thing has solar cells in it. So that way it can help power like the electronic portion of that truck. So you can see basic ideas right there. And I shouldn't really have to explain too much to this whole thing. But basically, the sunlight goes down, there's the panels, the module, photovoltaic cells, and so on. Basically, kind of like that, you're zooming in on it is what you're doing there. So basically, here's the zoomed out version. You zoom in a little bit closer. There's the panel, then the module, and the photovoltaic cell looks exactly like this is what's going on. Alrighty, so then this is a kind of an interesting talking about the science behind the story, kind of the impacts of it, and kind of the impacts to societies is what they're going to be discussing here. And so like the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see, I'm not sure if you can read that, I'll zoom in. So the wind turbines kill hundreds of thousands of birds each year when they fly into the blades. Like I said, they're killing a lot of them, unfortunately. All right, so now we're talking about solar, the advantages and the disadvantages. So, the advantages, It's inexhaustible. Obviously, the sun's not going away anytime soon. So the local control of power, not necessarily simply like the local municipalities and towns, even though that is great as well, but local control of power is putting it into like the homeowner's hands as well. You got no fuel use. It's quiet and it's safe. You don't have a huge like generator outside your house. And there's obviously there's little maintenance as well. Like if there's a big storm, climb up on your roof and like use a blower to like blow off like the dirt and any leaves and things like that. And they last 20 to 30 years, so they're going to pay for their installation costs over their lifetime 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times over. The disadvantage, like I was talking about today, it's not always sunny, but it still does work in the clouds. So here in Washington, it's still going to work very well. Like we talked about in Germany, it still works very well. They get less sunny days than we do. There's obviously seasonal variation as well, which that is not necessarily going to be a huge thing, but like I also was talking about, a cooler climate actually makes it so they work better. And the big advantage or the big disadvantage is it's expensive. So if you're going to stay in your house for like 2 or 3 years, it doesn't make sense to put solar panels on. Like when I was in Las Vegas, I thought about doing this, but I knew I was going to be moving, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. And the guy was saying it's going to take about 7 to 8 years to pay off for me, so it just wasn't an economical, smart move for me to do. All right, moving on to 591, talking about solar has major potential. The 21.13 is basically talking about this diagram. So the price of it is starting to fall, whereas the production of it is starting to skyrocket. So it has really, really, really big potential. So there's talking about wind power, which is wind turbines and wind farms. So the wind turbine is just simply like the big windmill per se. Then the wind farm is if you have like a whole bunch of those guys stuck together. So the wind power is also growing very quickly. So like that diagram right there, same thing. Price is falling substantially because the technology is getting better, but the production is also skyrocketing. So it's a really good thing. So offshore wind is actually more consistent. It's also faster as well, because basically it doesn't have to get caught up by like, the potential buildings that are in the way and the trees that are in the way and stuff like that. So offshore wind farms are actually more consistent and potentially more profitable, and that can make more energy over the long haul. So like you can see a picture up here of one of those offshore wind farms. That's on page 593. So then the percentage of wind power by each nation, I like this part. So you can see like China is actually leading the way with this. So 33% of their energy is from wind, and that's it. Okay, they do a really good job there. Oh, I'm sorry, percentage of global wind power in each nation. So 33% of the global wind is coming from China. I'm sorry, I misread that. All right, so moving on to 594 for the wind pros and cons. So a very high EROI. So like I said, it takes a lot of money to kind of get this thing going, but it starts to pay off very, very quickly. So it can be in a small scale or it can be a large scale. Those wind farms can be only 3, 4, 5, or can be 3, 4, or 5 dozen of them. Then the farmers can also lease their land. So like think about it, if you have, let's say you have 1,000 acres, and they come to you and they're like, hey, we want to put 2 of these on there, that out of your 1,000 acres, it's going to take up 0.1 acre. And we're going to give you a bunch of money for it. Well, that sounds great. Plus, I can still grow all of my crops right around the thing. So, all right, sounds good. It's an easy thing. Plus, jobs. Like we've talked about those green collar jobs. Jobs are always a good thing. The con, the wind varies greatly. And that's what I was just saying. Offshore is much more consistent. So the wind varies greatly. Then the public pushback, because basically there's that, it kills hundreds of thousands of birds. A lot of people say, then absolutely not. They just put their foot down. Since it's killing animals, I'm out, kind of a thing. So there's a big public pushback for that. All right, leave some questions so we have stuff to talk about.